A rusted cage sat in the freezing rain with a handwritten sign, "For sale." Inside, a starving German shepherd mother curled around her last surviving puppy, trembling as strangers walked by. But when a lonely Navy SEAL stopped and looked into her eyes, he didn't just find two animals in need of rescue. He uncovered a cruel secret, a dangerous threat, and a miracle that would bring his broken heart back home. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if stories of rescue, faith, and second chances touch your heart, please subscribe to join our community. Late autumn rain swept in from Casco Bay, turning Portland's harbor streets into ribbons of gray water and cold light. Jack Miller had no reason to be walking there, which was why he kept walking. At 39, he still moved like the Navy SEAL he had once been. Tall, broad-shouldered, disciplined in every step, with a lean strength shaped by years of salt, sand, and war. His dark brown hair was cut short, threaded with gray near the temples, and a close-trimmed beard sharpened the hard line of his jaw. His blue-gray eyes noticed exits, shadows, and suffering before they noticed beauty. He wore an old dark field jacket, damp jeans, and boots that had crossed deserts and too many hospital corridors. People saw him as quiet and polite, perhaps distant. They did not see the nights when he woke hearing helicopters where there was only rain, or the mornings when his apartment felt heavier than any battlefield. Since leaving the service, Jack had learned that peace could be cruel when a man no longer knew what to do with his hands. So he walked near the harbor, past shuttered bait shops, fogged cafe windows, and gulls hunched on rooftops like old judges in wet coats. Cars hissed along the street. The city was alive, yet nobody seemed truly present. Everyone was escaping the weather, the day, or one another. Jack might have kept moving if he had not heard the smallest sound near an old lamppost at the corner of a commercial street. It was not a bark, not even a proper whimper. It was a broken breath, thin as thread, nearly swallowed by the rain. Jack stopped. Beside the lamppost sat a rusted metal cage crooked on the wet sidewalk, its corners crusted orange, its bars slick with rain. A piece of cardboard had been tied to the top with frayed twine. The words were written in thick black marker, already bleeding from the water. "For sale." For a moment, Jack simply stared, as if the city itself had placed an altar of cruelty before him and dared him to walk away. Inside the cage lay a German shepherd mother. She was perhaps 3 years old, though hunger and cold had made her look older. Her once rich black and tan coat was soaked flat against her ribs, revealing the sharp architecture of neglect beneath. Mud clung to her legs. One ear stood alert while the other sagged with exhaustion. Her brown eyes, glassy from cold, tracked every movement around her, not with anger, but with the terrible patience of a creature who had learned to measure fear carefully. Curled beneath her chest was a single puppy, no more than 5 weeks old. He was tiny, black and tan like his mother, with a pale patch on his chest no bigger than a thumbprint and one small ear folded sideways as if even it lacked the strength to stand. His body trembled in shallow waves. He did not cry. That frightened Jack more than crying would have. A passing man glanced down and muttered, "Poor dogs," before vanishing beneath his umbrella. A young couple slowed, saw the sign, then crossed the street. No one stopped. The rain kept falling. Jack felt something old and wounded stir beneath his ribs. He had seen stray dogs on foreign roads follow convoys with hopeful eyes. He had seen himself in mirrors after funerals, alive but abandoned somewhere no map could mark. The mother dog lifted her head an inch, placing her body more firmly over the puppy. Even half-starved, half-frozen, she was still a fortress. That nearly undid him. Jack crouched slowly, making himself smaller, gentler, less like a threat. Rain ran down the back of his neck. His knees touched the wet pavement. He did not reach for the latch. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice low and rough from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." The shepherd's lips trembled, but she did not growl. Her gaze held his with a weary intelligence that felt almost human. Jack removed one glove and extended his bare hand toward the bars, palm open, fingers still. The cold bit instantly into his skin. He waited. The world narrowed to rain, breath, rust, and those brown eyes. The puppy shifted weakly beneath her, and the mother lowered her muzzle, torn between warning and hope. At last, slowly, as if crossing a battlefield no one else could see, she leaned forward and touched her wet nose to Jack's fingers through the cage. It was only a small touch, soft and freezing, but inside Jack Miller, something long locked away opened like a door. Jack stayed crouched in the rain for several breaths after the mother German shepherd touched his hand, afraid that any sudden movement might break the fragile bridge between them. The harbor wind pushed cold water across the sidewalk, and the cardboard sign above the cage fluttered weakly, the words "For Sale" bleeding into dark streaks. The mother dog kept her muzzle close to his fingers, trembling but no longer pulling away. Beneath her chest, the puppy shifted once, a tiny shudder of life wrapped in wet fur. Jack swallowed hard. He had been trained to assess wounds, exits, threats, and odds, but there was no clean tactical answer for this. There was only a rusted cage, 2 freezing animals, and a city full of people walking around them like they were part of the weather. He glanced toward the row of small businesses near the curb and spotted a food cart beneath a torn green awning. Steam rose from it in pale ribbons. The vendor was a compact man in his late 50s with a round face reddened by wind, a gray mustache stained slightly yellow from years of coffee, and thick hands that looked made for work rather than tenderness. His name, stitched on the chest of his faded brown coat, read Earl. He had the tired patience of someone who had spent decades watching strangers hurry past him with their eyes down, and though his expression was not cruel, it had the worn look of a man who had learned to survive by not getting involved. Jack stood slowly, keeping one eye on the cage, then walked to him. "That cage by the lamppost," Jack said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "Do you know who's selling them?" Earl looked past him, squinting through the rain. "Selling what?" Jack pointed. The vendor's face changed when he finally saw the cage properly. Not shock, exactly. Something duller. Something that said the world had disappointed him too many times to surprise him anymore. "That thing's been there since early morning," Earl said. "Maybe before I opened. I figured somebody was coming back." "You saw who left it?" Jack asked. Earl shook his head. "No, I was setting up, rain coming sideways. Could have been a truck, could have been some guy from the alley. Folks leave all kinds of things down here." Jack's jaw tightened. "Those aren't things." The vendor looked at him then. Really looked, noticing the old military posture, the steady shoulders, the eyes that did not wander when something mattered. His own gaze softened, but only a little. "I know, pal, I know. But it's not my cage." Jack looked back at Bella and Buddy. Bella had lifted her head, watching him from behind the bars, rain dripping from the black saddle of her coat. The puppy's pale chest patch flashed faintly when he breathed. For one irrational second, Jack imagined walking away to find animal control, to file a report, to do everything properly. Then the puppy shivered so violently that the thought died. Proper could wait. Warmth could not. "If someone comes back," Jack said, reaching into his jacket, "you tell them they were sold." Earl frowned. "Sold? I just told you it's not mine." Jack opened his wallet. Inside were a few worn bills, a VA appointment card, an old photo folded behind his military ID, and not much else. His disability check was still days away. He counted out what he had: 2 20s, a 10, and several damp singles. It was almost laughable. A decorated soldier standing in cold rain, buying what no one had the right to sell from a man who did not own it. Yet, the cardboard sign had made the cruelty public, and Jack needed the ending to be public too. He pushed the money into Earl's hand. "Then you're not selling them," Jack said. "You're witnessing that I bought them out of this. If anyone asks, you saw me pay. You saw me take them somewhere safe. No one else touches that cage." Earl stared at the bills as if they had grown thorns. You don't have to do that." "Yes," Jack said quietly. "I do." The words came out heavier than he intended. They carried deserts, funerals, empty rooms, and every creature he had failed to reach in time. Earl must have heard some of that weight, because he closed his hand around the money and nodded once. "All right," he said. "I saw it. You bought them. They're yours now." Jack almost corrected him. They were not his, not like property, not like gear or furniture or a truck with a title, but the phrase still struck him in a strange place. Yours now, responsible now, bound now. He turned back toward the cage. Bella watched him approach, ears low but eyes steady. "I'm getting you out of here," he murmured. "Both of you." He did not open the cage on the street. The sidewalk was too cold, the rain too sharp, the passing feet too careless. Instead, he tested the handle. The metal was slick, frozen in places, and heavier than it looked. Bella stiffened as the cage shifted, curling tighter around Buddy. "Easy," Jack whispered. "I know. I hate cages too." The sentence surprised him. It had left his mouth before he could stop it. Maybe because he had lived inside one since coming home, though his had no bars and plenty of silence. Just then, the bell above a nearby cafe door jingled wildly. A woman stepped into the rain holding an armful of folded blankets against her chest. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender with a practical strength in her posture, the kind built from long hours on her feet rather than gyms. Her dark auburn hair was twisted into a loose knot, though rain had pulled several strands against her fair, freckled cheeks. Her eyes were hazel, sharp with worry but warm at the edges. This was Sarah Parker, owner of the small harbor cafe with fogged windows and yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk. Locals knew her as brisk, kind, and stubborn enough to feed fishermen on credit when storms kept boats docked. Years earlier, her father, a Coast Guard medic, had died during a rescue off the Maine coast, and since then Sarah had carried grief like a hidden pocket watch, always close, rarely shown, ticking beneath everything she did. "Wait," she called, hurrying toward Jack. "Please, take these." Jack looked at the blankets, then at her face. "Ma'am, Don't ma'am me in weather like this," she said, trying to sound firm, though her voice shook when she saw Bella. "Those dogs are freezing." She knelt just enough to peer through the bars. Buddy gave a faint twitch under his mother's chin. Sarah's mouth tightened, and for a moment the practiced composure of a business owner cracked. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. Bella stared back, exhausted but protective. Sarah did not reach in. That told Jack something good about her. Kindness with restraint, compassion without grabbing. "I don't know who left them," Sarah said, standing again. "I noticed the cage an hour ago, but the lunch rush hit and I thought—" She stopped, ashamed of the sentence before finishing it. Jack understood too well. People survived by telling themselves they would act in a minute, after the next task, after the next breath, after the world became convenient. Sometimes that minute was all cruelty needed. "You're helping now," he said. Sarah blinked at him, as if forgiveness from a stranger was harder to accept than blame. She handed him 2 thick wool blankets, navy and cream, both smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon. Then she pressed a paper cup into his free hand. "For you. Black coffee. You look like you forgot you're human." A ghost of a smile moved across Jack's face and vanished. "Sometimes." Sarah studied him more closely then. The military bearing, the soaked jacket, the careful way he kept his body between the cage and the street. "You were service?" "Navy," he said. "Once." "My father was Coast Guard," she replied softly. Men like him never said much either. The rain deepened between them. Neither of them filled the silence with easy words. Jack set the coffee on the cart's narrow ledge, wrapped the blankets around the cage, and tucked the edges in so the wind could not reach Buddy. Bella's eyes followed every movement. When the wool covered the top, the cage became less like a display and more like a small covered shrine. Earl came over and helped lift one side without being asked. "Truck yours?" he said. Jack nodded toward an old blue pickup parked half a block away, its doors salted white, windshield cracked in one corner. Together, they carried the cage carefully through the rain. People stepped aside now, some staring, some pretending not to. Jack noticed all of them and none of them. His focus narrowed to the weight in his hands, the faint movement beneath the blanket, the mother dog's breath fogging the bars. At the truck, he lowered the cage onto the back seat instead of the open bed. Bella flinched at the jolt, and Buddy made that thin, broken sound again. "Almost there," Jack said, his voice dropping into the same tone he had once used to guide frightened young soldiers through darkness. "You just hold on." Sarah stood near the curb, arms folded against the cold. "There's an emergency vet on Forest Avenue," she said, "and if you need food, towels, anything, my cafe's called Parker's. Yellow door, you come back." Jack nodded. "Thank you, Sarah." She looked surprised he had read the name from her apron. "Take care of them, Jack." He paused with his hand on the truck door. He had not told her his name. Then he realized she had read it from the faded tape on his old field jacket. For some reason, hearing his name spoken gently by a stranger made his chest ache. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced into the rearview mirror. Beneath the blanket, Bella's face was just visible through the bars. Her eyes met his, no longer only afraid, not yet trusting, but watching. Buddy moved weakly against her. Jack pulled away from the curb, leaving the lamppost, the bleeding sign, Earl's cart, and Sarah's yellow cafe behind him. The harbor rain followed the truck through the gray streets as he drove toward his small apartment near the water, carrying with him 2 lives the city had priced too cheaply, and a promise he had not known he was still capable of making. The truck climbed slowly through the wet streets of Portland, its tires hissing through shallow rivers of rain as the harbor lights blurred behind the windshield like candles seen through tears. Jack Miller drove with one hand on the wheel and the other hovering near the heater dial, turning it higher even though the old pickup groaned in protest. In the back seat, wrapped beneath Sarah Parker's wool blankets, the rusted cage rattled softly with every turn. Bella remained curled around her puppy, but Jack could see her eyes in the rearview mirror, 2 dark brown lanterns watching him through the bars. She did not trust him, not yet. He respected that. Trust, Jack knew, was not something a wounded creature owed the person who found her. It was something earned in quiet inches, in patience, in hands that did not grab, in voices that did not rise. The puppy made no sound now, and that silence pressed harder on Jack than any cry could have. He drove faster. His apartment sat on the 2nd floor of an old brick building near the harbor, the kind of place that had once housed dock workers, fishermen, and men who came home smelling of salt and rope. Now it held lonely retirees, young renters, and people like Jack, who paid on time, made no noise, and gave neighbors nothing to gossip about except the fact that he always looked like he was listening for something no one else could hear. He parked in the narrow lot behind the building, stepped into the rain, and opened the rear door. "Almost there," he murmured. His voice sounded strange in the dark, tender and uncertain, like an instrument he had not played in years. The cage was heavier than before, or perhaps his arms were finally noticing the cold. Bella stiffened when he lifted it, pressing her body more tightly over the puppy. "Easy, girl. I've got you." The words were meant for her, but some broken part of him listened too. By the time he reached his apartment door, rain had soaked through his jacket and dripped from his beard. The hallway smelled of old wood, radiator dust, and someone's boiled cabbage. Jack fumbled with his keys, shouldered the door open, and carried the cage inside. The apartment received him with its usual silence. It was a narrow, dim place with scuffed floors, a small kitchen, a sagging armchair by the window, and a bed pushed against the far wall as if even furniture had learned not to expect guests. A framed photograph of Jack's SEAL team hung above a small table. 6 men in desert light, young enough to believe they could outwalk death, smiling with the tired arrogance of men who had not yet paid the full price of survival. Beside the door hung a small wooden cross his mother had mailed him after his last deployment. It leaned slightly to the left no matter how often he straightened it. There were no plants, no family pictures, no useless, cheerful things. The apartment had been less a home than a bunker with a mailing address. Tonight, carrying Bella and her puppy inside, Jack felt its emptiness with sudden embarrassment, as if he had invited royalty into a ruin. He set the cage near the old gas heater, turned the knob until the metal belly ticked and coughed awake, then knelt slowly. The blanket shifted, and Bella's face appeared between the bars. In the warmer light, Jack saw her more clearly. She was a beautiful dog beneath the damage, a German shepherd with a noble head, a black mask across her muzzle, tan brows that gave her expression a sorrowful wisdom, and a body that should have been strong but had been thinned by hunger. Her left front paw bore a raw cut above the pad, not deep enough to kill but painful enough to explain the way she had held it curled against herself. Her ribs showed when she breathed. Still, when Jack reached for the latch, Bella lifted her head, not in surrender, but warning. Even half-starved, she guarded her pup like a queen defending the last gate of a fallen kingdom. Jack stopped. "All right," he whispered. "Your rules." He removed his wet jacket, hung it over a chair, and moved slowly around the apartment, narrating each action in the low, steady tone he had once used with frightened recruits and wounded civilians. He found old towels in the bathroom, a chipped bowl in the cabinet, a can of evaporated milk he had bought months ago and forgotten, and a small pot from the stove. He warmed water first, then mixed it carefully with the milk until it was no longer hot, only gentle. His hands shook once as he tested it on his wrist. He hated that. Not the shaking itself, but the memory it carried. Field hospitals, blood on gloves, a medic shouting numbers, one life balanced on whether help arrived in time. Not that night, he told himself under his breath. This is not that night. When he returned to the cage, Bella was still watching. The puppy lay beneath her chin, tiny and limp. Black and tan fur clumped from rain, the pale patch on his chest rising and falling in faint, stubborn beats. Jack opened the cage door only halfway and slid the towel in first, giving Bella time to smell it. She did. Then she looked at him. Her eyes held fear, but no hatred. Jack reached in slowly, not toward the puppy but toward her injured paw. Bella tensed. Her lip twitched. He stopped again. "You tell me," he said. "I won't take what you don't give." For a long moment the heater clicked. Rain tapped at the window, and the world seemed to balance on the breath of a starving dog. Then Bella lowered her head 1 inch. Permission. Fragile as frost. Jack cleaned the wound with warm water, dabbing rather than rubbing, his large fingers careful around the torn skin. Bella trembled, but did not snap. When he finished, he slid a folded towel beneath her and placed the bowl of warm milk near the puppy. The little one did not move. Jack's throat tightened. "Come on, little man," he whispered. "Don't make your mama fight alone." Bella nudged the puppy with her muzzle, then gave him a slow, weary lick. At last, the tiny head lifted. The puppy wobbled toward the bowl, missed it once, bumped his nose against the rim, and began to lap weakly. Jack exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. It came out almost like a laugh, but broke before becoming one. He warmed a little canned chicken with rice, mashed it soft, and set another bowl near Bella. She stared at it with the hollow hunger of an animal who had forgotten meals could arrive without punishment. Yet she did not eat. Instead, with trembling care, she pushed the bowl closer to the puppy. That small motion struck Jack harder than any battlefield memory had in months. He had seen men throw themselves over friends when mortar fire came. He had watched hands reach for others even when they had nothing left to give. But this mother, cold and wounded and nearly empty, still offered the first comfort to her child. Jack sat back on the floor, suddenly unable to stand. "You're something else," he said, voice rough. Bella finally took one mouthful, then another, never letting her body shift far from the puppy. The apartment warmed slowly. Rain blurred the window. Jack changed out of his wet shirt and boots, but stayed on the floor beside them because leaving felt wrong. The old photograph on the wall seemed to watch him. For months he had avoided looking at those faces, ashamed that he had survived long enough to become useless. Yet now, with a wounded dog eating beside his heater and a puppy fighting sleep in a towel, Jack felt an old instinct return. Not the instinct to destroy, but to guard. It was quieter than courage and heavier than duty. Hours passed in small tasks. He dried Bella's coat as much as she allowed. He warmed more milk. He placed towels under the puppy. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice softened each time, as though the room were teaching him a language older than grief. Near midnight, exhaustion settled over him. He leaned against the wall, legs stretched out, eyes burning. Bella had finally lowered her head onto the towel, though her gaze still flicked to him whenever he moved. The puppy slept beneath her chin. Then, just when Jack thought the tiny creature had disappeared into dreams, the puppy stirred. With great effort, he crawled from the hollow of Bella's chest, dragging his small belly over the towel, one paw folding awkwardly beneath him. Bella lifted her head but did not stop him. The puppy reached Jack's boot, sniffed the wet leather, and placed one trembling paw on the toe as if claiming a mountain. Jack stared down. Such a little thing should not have had the power to undo a grown man. But it did. Something inside him loosened, painful and warm, like blood returning to a frozen hand. He touched one finger gently to the puppy's head. "Buddy," he whispered. "That's what you are, aren't you?" The puppy blinked, too tired to understand, but left his paw there. Jack looked at the mother, whose eyes had softened in the amber heater light. "And you," he said, "you're Bella. Beautiful, brave, still here." Bella breathed out slowly and rested her muzzle near his knee. Jack did not smile fully. He had almost forgotten how. But the corner of his mouth moved, and in the cold apartment by the harbor, that was enough. For the first time in a long while, the silence around him did not feel empty. It had a heartbeat now. Mary Collins had seen many things from her second-floor window, but the sight of Jack Miller carrying a rusted cage through the rain stayed with her long after the hallway lights went dim. She was 72 years old, small-boned but not frail, with silver-white hair usually pinned at the back of her head, pale blue eyes that still held the sharpness of a schoolteacher, and hands marked by age but steady from a lifetime of grading papers, kneading bread, and holding on through grief. She had lived in the old harbor building for nearly 12 years, ever since her husband, Thomas Collins, passed away from a heart condition that had followed him home from Vietnam like a shadow refusing to retire. Thomas had been a quiet veteran with a square jaw, gentle hands, and the habit of standing near doors so no one else had to worry about what might come through them. After he died, Mary's world had narrowed to teacups, old books, Sunday hymns on the radio, and the view from her window. She knew the rhythms of the building, which pipes knocked at dawn, which neighbor burned toast, which footsteps belonged to the young couple upstairs. Jack's footsteps had always been different, measured, careful, heavy with a silence that reminded her too much of Thomas in the years when nightmares still followed him into morning. That evening, Mary stood in her small kitchen with a pot of chicken soup warming on the stove, watching steam fog the window above the sink. She had meant to make enough for herself and freeze the rest, as she often did, because cooking for one still felt like writing a letter with no address. But then, she heard movement from Jack's apartment below. The scrape of something metal, the soft thud of boots, and once, so faint she almost doubted it, the thin sound of a puppy. Mary turned off the burner and stood very still. For a moment, fear and memory argued inside her. Thomas had once brought home a rain-soaked mutt with a broken tail, and Mary had scolded him for tracking mud across her clean floor even as she fetched towels. That dog had slept beside Thomas for 14 years. After the funeral, the old mutt had refused to leave the bedroom for 3 days. and Mary had understood then that animals grieved with the full honesty humans often lacked. She ladled soup into a covered pot, wrapped it in a faded dish towel, and put on her beige wool coat. At Jack's door, she paused with one hand lifted, suddenly aware of how strange this might seem. A widow with soup. A man who never asked for company. 2 wounded dogs behind a closed door. But loneliness, Mary had learned, was a house fire that burned quietly. By the time others smelled smoke, the rooms were already gone. She knocked. Inside, something shifted. Then came Jack's voice, low and guarded. "Who is it?" "Mary Collins," she replied, from upstairs. "I brought soup." Silence followed, not rude, only uncertain. When the door opened, Jack stood barefoot on the worn floorboards, wearing a dry gray shirt and fatigue pants, his damp hair pushed back as though he had run his hands through it too many times. Without the field jacket, he looked younger and more tired. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, but his eyes carried the careful apology of a man who disliked needing anything. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "I'm sorry if we made noise." "At my age, noise is proof the building still has a pulse," Mary said, lifting the pot slightly. "May I come in before this soup becomes a block of ice?" A small, reluctant softness moved across his face, and he stepped aside. "Yes, ma'am." "Mary," she corrected gently, "if I'm bringing soup, we can survive first names." The apartment was even barer than she expected. A narrow bed, an old armchair, a gas heater ticking by the wall, a military photograph, and a small cross near the door. No clutter, no curtains with color, no evidence that anyone expected to be loved there. Then Mary saw the dogs. Bella lay on a towel near the heater, her black and tan body curved protectively around Buddy, whose tiny head rested against her front leg. The mother dog lifted her muzzle when Mary entered, ears low, eyes wary but exhausted. Her coat had begun to dry in uneven patches, revealing the proud shape beneath the hunger. Buddy, small as a bundled mitten, blinked at the newcomer with cloudy puppy confusion, his folded ear giving him the comical look of a soldier whose helmet had slipped sideways. Mary stopped so quickly the soup pot nearly tilted. "Oh," she whispered. The word carried more than surprise. It carried the ache of every creature she had ever wanted to protect and could not. Jack closed the door behind her. "I found them near the harbor, in a cage." "I saw you bring it in," Mary said, "from my window." Jack's gaze flicked down, almost embarrassed. "Then you saw enough." "I saw a man who stopped." She set the soup on the small kitchen counter, then looked back at Bella. "That is never a small thing." Jack did not answer. He busied himself finding bowls, though there were only 2 in the cupboard and one had a crack along the rim. Mary noticed the way he moved, efficient, quiet, always leaving space between himself and others, as if afraid his own presence might be too much. Thomas had moved that way after the war, like a good man trying not to frighten the world with what he had survived. "She let me clean her paw," Jack said after a while, as if reporting a fragile victory. "The puppy drank a little milk." "Then they're stronger than they look." Mary removed her gloves and lowered herself carefully into a crouch, her knees protesting with 2 faint pops. "A sound effect of old age," she told Buddy, who stared at her solemnly. "You'll get your own one day, if you behave." To Jack's surprise, a short breath of laughter escaped him. It was not much, barely more than air, but it changed the room. Bella's eyes shifted from Mary to Jack as if she too had noticed something rare. Mary extended her hand, palm down, but not too close. "Hello, beautiful girl," she said to Bella. "You don't have to trust me quickly. I don't trust quickly either." Bella watched the hand for several seconds. Then Buddy, apparently deciding diplomacy was too slow, wriggled out from the towel and stumbled forward. His legs went in 4 different directions, noble in ambition and disastrous in execution. He made it 3 inches, tripped over the edge of the rug, and landed chin first with a tiny huff. Mary laughed before she could stop herself. a bright, startled laugh that seemed to fly around the apartment and knock dust off the walls. "Well, aren't you a brave little drunk sailor?" she said, scooping him gently only after looking to Bella for permission. Bella tensed, but Jack knelt beside her. "It's okay," he murmured. "She's safe." Mary held Buddy close to her chest, feeling the faint bird-like flutter of his heartbeat. Her smile trembled. "Thomas would have loved him," she said softly, almost to herself. Jack glanced at the military photograph on the wall, then back to her. "Your husband?" "Vietnam," Mary said. "He came home with medals he hid in a drawer and nightmares he could not hide anywhere. But give that man a wounded animal, and suddenly he knew exactly how to stay alive for one more day." Jack's face tightened in recognition. Not pain, exactly, but the arrival of an old truth. Mary placed Buddy back near Bella, careful and slow. Bella leaned forward, sniffed Mary's wrist, and then, with a tenderness that made the old woman's eyes fill, gave her skin one small lick. Mary froze. For 10 years since Thomas died, she had carried her days like folded laundry. Neat, quiet, and untouched. That small lick unfolded something. "Thank you," she whispered to the dog. "I suppose I needed that." Jack looked away, giving her privacy without leaving. Mary rose with effort and began serving soup, because feelings, like soldiers and widows, sometimes needed food to keep from collapsing. She handed Jack a bowl. He took it with both hands as if it were something more sacred than broth. The first spoonful made him close his eyes. Not dramatically, not for show, just a tired man remembering warmth. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. I used too much pepper. I've eaten worse." "That is not the compliment you think it is." This time, Jack almost smiled. The heater clicked. Rain tapped the window. Bella settled her head beside Buddy, though her eyes remained open. Mary looked from the dogs to Jack and saw the truth plainly. The cage had not only held Bella and her puppy. Some invisible cage had held this man too. She did not say it directly. Men like Jack often ran from sentences that sounded too much like rescue. Instead, she buttoned her coat and moved toward the door. "I live upstairs, 2B, she said. "If you need towels, blankets, or someone to tell you when you're being stubborn, I'm available." "I'll remember that," Jack replied. Mary paused at the threshold. "Take care of them, Jack." Then, after a beat, softer. "And let them take care of you a little, too." When the door closed behind her, Jack stood listening to her slow footsteps fade up the stairs. In the amber light of the heater, Bella shifted closer and rested her muzzle near his knee. Buddy slept against her chest, one tiny paw twitching in a dream. The apartment was still poor, still cold around the edges, still marked by loneliness. But something had entered with Mary's soup and laughter, something humble and holy. For the first time in years, Jack wondered if a heart could become warm again by degrees. Morning came without sunlight, only a pale gray wash over Portland's harbor, as if the sky had been wrung dry of warmth and left hanging above the rooftops. Jack Miller had slept less than 2 hours on the floor beside Bella and Buddy, waking each time the puppy twitched or the mother dog shifted her wounded paw. By dawn, the rain had thinned into a mist that clung to the windows and softened the city into blurred shapes. Bella was still weak, but her eyes followed Jack with a little less fear than before. Buddy, wrapped in one of Sarah Parker's wool blankets, had enough strength to nose at Jack's thumb when he checked the warmth of the milk. That tiny movement decided the morning for him. Soup, towels, and patience could hold them through the night, but they needed more than an old soldier's careful hands. They needed someone who knew how to heal bodies that could not explain where they hurt. Jack called the nearest clinic from the number Sarah had scribbled on a napkin and was told to come at once. Getting Bella into the truck took time. Jack did not force her. He carried Buddy first, tucked against his chest like a fragile secret, then waited while Bella sniffed the open cage door, the hallway, the stairwell, and finally his hand. In the end, she allowed him to lift her. She weighed less than she should have, all bone and damp fur beneath the noble shape of a German shepherd, and the wrongness of it settled in Jack's arms like an accusation. The clinic sat on Forest Avenue between a closed flower shop and a laundromat, its blue sign swinging in the wind. Harbor Light Veterinary Care. Inside, the air was warm and bright, smelling of antiseptic, clean towels, and faintly of kibble. Dr. Emily Harris met them before Jack could sit down. She was in her early 40s, medium height, with a strong, capable build, warm brown skin, dark curly hair pulled into a practical bun, and clear green eyes that missed very little. A narrow silver scar crossed the back of her left hand, the kind earned from handling frightened animals rather than avoiding them. Emily had the calm authority of someone who had spent years turning panic into procedure. She spoke gently, but not softly enough to be false. People in Portland trusted her because she did not dramatize suffering. She looked straight at it, named it, and then got to work. "You're Jack Miller?" she asked, already studying the blanket in his arms and the exhausted shepherd at his side. "Yes, ma'am. Emily is fine. Bring them in." The exam room was small and clean, with pale green walls, a metal table, and a framed photograph of Emily as a young woman standing beside an old golden retriever. Jack noticed because he noticed everything, but Emily saw him notice and said, "That was Moses. He's the reason I became a vet. Also, the reason I learned never to leave sandwiches unattended." It was a small joke, offered like a handrail over a dark place. Jack nodded, but did not smile. Emily did not seem offended. She helped him place Bella on a thick towel instead of directly on the cold table. Bella trembled, ears low, body angled toward Buddy even as Emily examined her. "She's protective," Emily said. "Good. That means she still has fight." Jack kept one hand near Bella's shoulder. She was in a cage near the harbor. Sign said for sale. No one knew who left her. Emily's expression tightened, but her hands stayed gentle. She checked Bella's gums, pressed along her ribs, listened to her heart, examined the injured paw, then paused at the marks around Bella's legs and neck. The room seemed to shrink around that silence. "How long was she out there?" "At least since morning. Maybe longer." Emily exhaled through her nose. "That's bad enough, but this started long before yesterday." Jack looked up. "What do you mean?" Emily parted the fur near Bella's lower neck and showed him faint, rubbed lines where a collar or rope had sat too tight for too long. Then she moved to the front legs, pointing to rough patches and healing abrasions. "These are restraint marks. Not from one bad night, repeated friction, and she's dehydrated, underweight, anemic from the look of her gums. Her body's been pushed hard." Bella turned her head and nudged Buddy, who lay in a warmed towel while Emily checked his breathing. The puppy's folded ear twitched once. Emily's face softened for him, then hardened again with the truth she had to tell. "He's about 5 weeks old. Too young to be separated from proper care, but old enough to fight if we support him. Low body weight, mild hypothermia last night from what you described, but his lungs sound clearer than I expected." "That's good." Jack's shoulders dropped a fraction. "He'll live?" "If infection doesn't surprise us, and if he keeps eating, yes, he has a chance." Jack looked at Bella. "And her?" Emily's hand rested briefly on the shepherd's side. "She has a chance too, but she's been bred too often." The sentence fell into the room like a stone into deep water. Jack did not move. "Bred?" "Yes." Emily removed her gloves slowly. "I can't prove everything today, but I've seen this pattern. Female shepherd, underweight, restraint marks, swollen mammary glands, no records, dumped with a puppy and a price sign, backyard breeding. Maybe worse. They use the mother until her body starts failing, sell what puppies survive, then abandon or dump her where someone desperate or careless might pay cash and ask no questions." Jack stared at the floor. His hands had gone still, too still, the way they had before doors were breached and rooms cleared. Inside him, something cold and ancient rose. Not the hot anger of insult, but the clean, focused rage that came when the innocent were treated as inventory. "Buddy is the only one?" he asked. Emily glanced at the puppy. "From what I can tell, yes. The only surviving pup from the most recent litter, or the only one they bothered to leave with her. Either way, she kept him alive." Bella's eyes lifted to Jack's, and there was no plea in them now, only exhaustion and a terrible dignity. Jack felt ashamed on behalf of his species. "Can you report it?" "I will," Emily said, "but reports need threads to pull. A cage by the harbor, no cellar, no microchip, no license, no witnesses willing to say much. It may not be enough yet." "Yet," Jack repeated. Emily watched him carefully. "Mr. Miller, I read people almost as much as animals. You look like a man who hears not enough yet as permission to go hunting." Jack's jaw flexed. "I'm not looking for trouble. Men who say that usually are. Be careful. The people who profit from dogs like Bella do not think of them as lives. They think of them as money that can bite." She gave Bella fluids, cleaned and wrapped her paw, sent Jack home with medication, puppy formula, feeding instructions, and a look that told him she knew he would remember every word. When he returned to the apartment, Mary Collins was waiting in the hallway with her beige coat buttoned to her throat and worry pressed into every line of her face. "Well?" she asked. Jack told her only what he could say without letting his anger spill into the hall. Mary listened, one hand against her chest. Her pale blue eyes, usually gentle, sharpened with old grief and older resolve. "Thomas knew people," she said suddenly. "After he retired, he helped a rescue group once. Not officially, just driving supplies, making calls. They shut down a breeding place outside Bangor years ago." She hurried upstairs and came back with a yellowed folder, its edges soft from time. Inside was a faded flyer marked with a paw print inside a circle. Safe Harbor Animal Rescue Network. Every life deserves shelter. "They may still exist," Mary said. "Or someone from it may." Jack took the flyer, his thumb brushing the old paper. The rain tapped softly on the stairwell window behind them. Bella rested inside his apartment. Buddy curled against her, both alive because of one impossible night and still threatened by whatever shadow had placed them in that cage. Jack folded the flyer and slipped it into his pocket. Until that moment he had thought he had found 2 abandoned animals. Now he understood he might have found the loose thread of something much larger, and somewhere in the cold machinery of his heart, a mission began to take shape. The storm arrived 2 nights after Mary placed the faded rescue flyer in Jack Miller's hand, rolling in from the Atlantic like something ancient and ill-tempered. By sunset, Portland had lost its edges. The harbor vanished behind sheets of freezing rain, the streetlights blurred into trembling halos, and the old brick building groaned as the wind threw itself against the windows. Jack had spent the day doing small things with the exactness of a man trying not to think too far ahead. He gave Bella her medicine, warmed formula for Buddy, folded Sarah's blankets near the heater, and taped the rescue flyer to the inside of a kitchen cabinet where he could see the paw print logo every time he reached for a bowl. Safe Harbor Animal Rescue. Network. Every life deserves shelter. The words should have comforted him. Instead, they made the apartment feel like a watch post. Bella seemed to feel it too. She was stronger now, not well, but no longer sinking. Her black and tan coat had begun to lift from her ribs in soft, uneven waves as it dried and warmed, and her brown eyes had lost a little of their feverish glass. Still, she never let Buddy drift far from her. The puppy, wrapped in a towel near Jack's old boots, had learned the apartment by scent: leather, soup, wood smoke, old wool, and the faint medicinal smell from the clinic. Every time he tried to stand, his folded ear flopped over his eye, giving him the solemn dignity of a general wearing the wrong hat. Mary Collins came down just before the power failed, carrying an oil lantern, a loaf of bread, and the determined expression of a woman who had already decided she would not be sent away. "Don't argue," she said when Jack opened the door. Her silver-white hair was tucked beneath a knitted cap, and her small frame looked almost swallowed by her beige coat, but her pale blue eyes were bright with command. I taught teenagers for 34 years. A stubborn Navy man does not frighten me. Jack stepped aside. I wasn't going to argue. Good. I would have won. The lights flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness folded over the apartment, broken only by the blue-gray stormlight at the window. Jack lit the lantern while Mary set bread on the counter. The flame bloomed gold, and the room seemed to breathe again. Outside, the freezing rain began changing to wet snow, striking the glass in heavy whispers. Bella lifted her head from the blanket, ears angled toward the door. "She doesn't like the wind," Mary said softly. Jack watched the dog's body, the direction of her gaze, the way her injured paw tucked beneath her, but her shoulders stayed ready. "That's not the wind." Mary went quiet. The storm pressed around them. For a long while they sat near the heater as if gathered beside a small campfire at the edge of a wilderness. Buddy slept across the toes of Jack's boots, his tiny body rising and falling in stubborn rhythm. Bella lay between the puppy and the door, not asleep, not fully awake, a mother carved from hunger and vigilance. Mary poured tea from a thermos and told Jack about Thomas during the blizzard of 1978, how he had nailed blankets over the windows and made terrible pancakes by lantern light. "He burned every batch," she said. "But he called them smoked flapjacks as if that made him a pioneer." Jack gave a faint smile. "Did it?" "No. It made him a bad cook with confidence." The little joke warmed the room better than the failing heater. Yet Jack's mind kept drifting toward the flyer, the clinic, Emily's careful voice naming restraint marks and overbreeding. He had known cruelty in uniforms and cruelty in alleys, cruelty with flags and cruelty with clean paperwork. But the quietness of this cruelty, the way someone had left Bella beneath a "for sale" sign as if her life were a broken chair, dug into him. Near midnight, the building shuddered under a harder gust. Bella rose so suddenly that Buddy woke and gave a weak squeak. Her hackles lifted along her spine. A low growl rolled out of her, not loud, but certain. Jack stood. The old part of him returned without ceremony. Breath slow, shoulders loose, senses opening. Mary's fingers tightened around her teacup. "Jack?" He held up one hand. For several seconds there was only storm. Then, from somewhere beyond the door, a faint scrape touched the hallway. Not pipes, not wind. Weight against old floorboards. Jack moved silently to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was dark except for the emergency light near the stairs, flickering red. Nothing moved. But Bella did not relax. Jack stayed there until the sound vanished into the groan of the building. "Could be a neighbor," Mary whispered. "Could be," Jack said. He did not believe it. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Mary dozed in the armchair with the blanket pulled to her chin. Jack stayed on the floor near Bella and Buddy, one hand resting close enough for the mother dog to smell him. At some hour before dawn, sleep finally took him like a thief. Morning arrived pale and bruised. The storm had passed, leaving the world covered in wet snow that clung to window ledges and fire escapes. The power returned with a hum, and the heater coughed awake. Mary woke embarrassed, insisting she had only rested her eyes for educational purposes. Jack opened the door to check the hall, and the humor drained from the room. 2 sets of boot prints marked the thin layer of slush that had blown in beneath the stairwell window and been tracked down the corridor. They were not Mary's small, careful steps, nor Jack's heavy boots. These were larger, deep-treaded, deliberate. They came from the stairwell, stopped directly outside his door, overlapped as if 2 men had stood there for some time, then turned back the way they had come. Jack crouched, studying them with a stillness that made Mary afraid to breathe. Bella stood behind him, her growl returning, softer now, but colder. "You saw something," Jack said without looking up. Mary's face went pale. "Last night," she admitted, "through my window, before I came down. 2 shadows near the entrance. I told myself it was the storm. Then, later, when I was in your chair, I thought I heard someone in the hall. I didn't want to frighten you." Jack stood slowly. "Mary, if something feels wrong, you tell me." "I know," she said, guilt flickering through her voice. "I spent so many years with nothing to protect that I forgot fear can be useful." Jack's expression softened, but only for a second. Then, he called the police. Officer Daniel Brooks arrived an hour later, stamping slush from his boots in the hallway. He was in his mid-40s, tall and broad through the chest with close-cropped black hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and brown eyes tired enough to have seen the worst of people but not tired enough to stop caring. His uniform was clean despite the weather, his voice steady without being dismissive. Jack recognized the type, a man who did not rush because rushing made people feel unsafe. Brooks listened as Jack explained Bella, the cage, the clinic report, and the footprints. He photographed the marks, asked Mary what she had seen, then looked toward Bella and Buddy inside the apartment. The mother dog watched him from beside the heater, body low but calm. "Beautiful shepherd," Brooks said quietly. "Rough story?" "Rougher than it should be," Jack replied. Brooks closed his notebook. "I'll file this with animal cruelty and keep an eye on the area, but right now, footprints and suspicion won't let me kick indoors." Jack nodded once. "I know." Brooks studied him. "Do you?" "Because you look like a man who might decide doors are optional." Mary made a small sound that might have been agreement. Jack said nothing. Brooks sighed. "Call me if you see anyone. Do not handle it alone." The warning stayed in the apartment after he left. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Bella healed. Buddy grew bolder, attacking Jack's bootlaces as if they were sea monsters. Mary tried to pretend she was not worried and failed with dignity. Then, just after midnight on the 3rd night, Jack woke to the low rumble of an engine below. He rose without turning on the lamp and moved to the window. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, he saw a black van idling across the street, its body unmarked, its windows dark. 2 men stepped out. One was tall and narrow-shouldered, wearing a black beanie and a heavy coat. His pale face was sharp beneath a patchy blonde beard, and he kept glancing up at the building. The other was shorter, thick-necked, with a shaved head, work gloves, and the restless movements of a man who trusted force more than thought. When the shorter man opened the rear doors, Jack saw metal cages stacked inside, their bars catching the streetlight like wet teeth. Bella rose behind him and growled. Jack did not need proof anymore to understand. Whoever had once owned her had found their way back. Jack Miller did not move for 3 full breaths after he saw the black van, because old training had taught him that the first thing fear wanted was movement, and the first thing survival required was thought. The street below lay slick with wet snow, silver under the lamps, and the unmarked van idled against the curb like a dark animal waiting to be fed. One man stood near the rear doors, tall and narrow beneath a black beanie, his patchy blonde beard catching the cold light whenever he turned his sharp face toward Jack's building. The other, shorter and thick-necked with a shaved head and heavy shoulders, kept flexing his gloved hands as though every problem in life had always been solved by grabbing harder. Behind them, metal cages lined the van's interior. Jack lifted his phone, took 3 photos of the plate, 2 of the men, 1 of the open doors, then sent them to Officer Daniel Brooks with 4 words. "They are here now." Bella stood behind him, her body rigid, a low growl trembling in her chest. Buddy stirred near Jack's boots, still small and unsteady but no longer silent the way he had been on that first terrible night. Jack crouched and touched 2 fingers to Bella's head. "Stay with him," he whispered. Bella looked at him, and for the first time her fear seemed less like helplessness and more like trust being forced to stand in a storm. From the armchair, Mary Collins woke with a start, her silver hair loose around her face, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. "Jack?" she whispered. He handed her the phone after sending 1 more message. "If Brooks calls, answer. Lock this behind me." Mary's pale blue eyes widened when she saw the van through the curtain, but she did not crumble. Widows of soldiers learn a strange kind of courage, the quiet courage of waiting while someone walks toward danger. "Don't be a hero," she said, voice thin but steady. Jack put on his coat. "I'm just buying time." That is exactly what heroes say before doing something foolish. For the first time that night, his mouth almost curved. "Then pray I do it intelligently." He slipped into the hallway and heard the lock turn behind him. The stairwell was dim, smelling of wet wood and old paint. Jack descended without haste, each step placed where the boards complained least. Outside, the cold hit his face hard enough to sharpen everything: the engine's rumble, the scrape of boots, the small metallic clink from inside the van. The tall man was speaking into a phone. "Yeah, same building. Old lady saw something maybe. Doesn't matter. We grab the female and the pup, then we're gone." The stocky man spat into the snow. "Should have never dumped her where people could see." Jack stepped from the shadow of the entrance. "You're late," he said. Both men froze. The tall one lowered the phone slowly, eyes narrowing. The stocky one turned first, squaring his shoulders. "Mind your business." Jack stood with his hands visible, posture relaxed, the way a winter sea looks calm before it takes a boat. "The shepherd is my business." Recognition passed between the men, not because they knew his name, but because cruel men always recognize the shape of opposition. The tall one tried a smile and failed. "Look, friend, that dog was misplaced. We're just collecting property." "Property doesn't bleed," Jack said. "Property doesn't hide a puppy under her ribs to keep him alive." The stocky man pulled a crowbar from inside his coat. It was a foolish weapon in a foolish hand, but foolish hands still hurt people. "Move." Jack did not. The man swung too wide, driven by anger instead of skill. Jack stepped inside the arc, caught the wrist, turned, and let the man's own weight fold him toward the van. The crowbar clattered into the snow. The tall one cursed and lunged, one hand flashing toward a knife clipped near his belt. Jack saw the motion before the blade cleared. He struck the forearm, hard enough to numb it, then drove the man back against the van door with his shoulder. The cages inside rattled. From somewhere within came a chorus of frightened whines, thin and terrible. That sound almost broke Jack's control, not his focus, but the cold discipline holding his rage in human shape. "You don't get to touch them again," he said. The stocky man tried to rise. Jack swept his leg and pinned him with a knee between the shoulder blades, not crushing, only ending the argument. The tall man clutched his deadened arm and staggered away, eyes flicking toward the street. Then blue lights washed over the snow. Officer Brooks' cruiser slid to a stop behind the van, followed by a second patrol car. Brooks stepped out with his sidearm drawn but pointed low, his broad frame steady beneath the flashing lights. "Portland Police. Hands where I can see them." The tall man lifted his hands. The stocky one cursed into the snow. Jack released him and stepped back at once, palms open. Brooks glanced at him. Half irritation, half relief. "Miller, I specifically remember saying, not alone." "You got the photos," Jack replied. "You got here." "That is not the same as listening." Still, Brooks moved fast, cuffing the suspects with the help of a younger officer. When he opened the van fully, his expression hardened. There were 5 dogs inside. 2 hounds pressed together in one cage, a trembling terrier with cloudy eyes, a young shepherd mix whose ears flattened at every sound, and a thin gray pit bull curled so tightly she looked like a stone. None of them barked. Their silence was worse. Brooks turned to Jack. "This is enough. Plates, cages, live animals, your vet's report, trespass attempt. We can pull the whole thread now." Jack looked up toward his apartment window. Mary stood behind the curtain with one hand over her mouth. Beside her, Bella's silhouette was visible, tall and watchful. Buddy was only a small shape near her feet. Jack felt the battle leave his body all at once, replaced by something heavier and softer. Relief, maybe, or grief arriving late. By morning, Safe Harbor Animal Rescue Network had been contacted through Mary's old flyer, and Dr. Emily Harris came to the scene in a heavy coat, her dark curls tucked under a wool hat, her green eyes bright with fury and purpose. Sarah Parker arrived too, carrying towels from her cafe and coffee for officers who had been outside since dawn. She looked at Jack's bruised knuckles, then at the van, then said, "You really don't know how to have a quiet week, do you?" Jack gave a tired breath that was almost a laugh. Apparently not. The investigation moved beyond him after that, as all good rescues should. Police followed records, phone numbers, and addresses. Emily treated the dogs from the van. Safe Harbor placed them in foster homes. The two men became part of something larger and uglier than a single night, but for Jack, the most important truth was smaller. Bella was not going back. Buddy was not going to be sold. A month later, sunlight finally touched Portland with spring in it. Jack signed the adoption papers at Harbor Light Veterinary Care while Buddy chewed the corner of his bootlace and Bella sat beside him, her coat fuller now, her eyes still solemn but no longer haunted. Emily handed him the forms and said, "They chose well." Jack looked at Bella, then at Buddy's crooked little ear. "I thought I chose them." "That's what animals let us believe." At home, Mary came down most evenings with tea, stories, and opinions she considered medical necessities. Sarah left a basket outside Jack's door with dog food, biscuits, and a note that read, "For the family." Slowly, the apartment changed. A dog bed appeared near the heater. Then, curtains Mary claimed were less depressing than bunker gray. Then a second mug on the shelf, because Mary said guests should not have to drink tea from a chipped bowl like shipwreck survivors. Bella healed into her strength, graceful and watchful, a queen restored after exile. Buddy grew rounder, bolder, and deeply committed to sleeping on Jack's old boots, as though guarding the feet that had carried him out of the rain. Jack kept the for sale sign. He dried it, flattened it, and placed it in a small wooden frame beside a new photograph taken by Mary. Jack standing by the window, Mary beside him, Bella seated proudly at his leg, and Buddy tucked against one boot with his folded ear falling over one eye. The sign no longer looked like a price. It looked like a defeated curse. On quiet nights, when harbor fog pressed against the glass and Bella breathed peacefully near the heater, Jack would look at that frame and understand what had happened. He had thought he was buying a wounded dog and her last puppy out of the cold, but somewhere between the rain, the soup, the storm, and the small paw on his boot, they had bought him back from a loneliness he had mistaken for survival. The apartment by the harbor was still old, still drafty, still imperfect, but it had laughter now. It had muddy paw prints. It had tea, dog hair, and reasons to wake before dawn. It had become what Jack had not dared to ask for, a home. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder, flashing lights, or angels standing at the door. Sometimes God sends them quietly, in the shivering breath of a frightened dog, in the tiny paw of a puppy resting on an old boot, in a lonely neighbor bringing soup, or in a broken man who chooses kindness when the world has already taught him to walk away. Jack thought he was saving Bella and Buddy from the cold, but perhaps God was using them to lead him back to warmth, back to purpose, back to a home his heart had forgotten how to believe in. And maybe that is true in our everyday lives too. We may never know how far one small act of compassion can travel. A kind word, a helping hand, a moment of mercy toward someone weaker than us. These things may look small, but in God's hands they can become miracles. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe kindness can still change the world, subscribe to our channel for more stories of love, faith, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, and fill your life with the quiet miracles you need most.